Craftsman Days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Right now, get a free select tool when you buy the Craftsman V20 2-pack battery kit. Whether it's the backyard, the bathroom, or beyond, Craftsman has the tools to help you power through and get the project done right. Because DIYing is unpredictable, but your tools shouldn't be. Shop Craftsman at Lowe's today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
A warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as the conference preview podcasts are here. This is going to be number 2. I last week did one for the America East. Today we are going to be doing the Atlantic Sun. How these conference preview podcasts are going to work. We're going to go with the low/mid-major podcast previews first, with it being as close to alphabetical order as possible. It is going to depend upon being able to get the guests on or not, but that said, we're going to be doing today the Atlantic Sun, second one in terms of the low/mid-majors in terms of alphabetical order. I do consider the Atlantic 10 to be a little bit of a bigger conference, so we'll see where that one slots in. But slotting in on this podcast today is going to be Blake Lovell, taking a look at all these teams, taking a look at the transitions in the offseason, some of the moves that have been made in the transfer portal. Here in the first segment, I'm going to give you guys the betting trends, the styles of play, and the nooks and crannies of this conference. And then in the final segment, I've got my projector or finish for the Atlantic Sun, and we're going to be running through all of these teams. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, the email does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And everything today is powered by Edge Boost. Over at Edge Boost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds whenever they want, wherever they want. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, make sure you type in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. And how about if we do dive in on an Atlantic Sun where it was a very interesting year last year. It was a very top-heavy conference where you had two teams in North Alabama along with Lipscomb really run the conference, and then in the end, obviously, Lipscomb was able to make the NCAA tournament, but as we know, they are going through a little bit of coaching transition here. No longer are they going to have at the helm their main guy as Lenny Ecuff decides to go northward in the offseason, so they're going to be at a little bit of transition, and you just notice that the teams that were really able to excel in the Atlantic Sun last season, they were the teams that they were able to do a really good job just in terms of being well-rounded, because a lot of these teams in the Atlantic Sun, when they struggle, it's all based on the defensive side of things. If you take a look at the bottom teams in this conference, pretty much every single one of them were some of the biggest dregs in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. You look at Stetson, you look at Central Arkansas, you look at a team like West Georgia, and these were all teams that were just getting smoked. Bellarmine, 363rd in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Stetson, 356th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. North Florida, 352nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. West Georgia, 343rd. Central Arkansas, 340th. So these were the teams that were leaving a lot of something to be desired, and that's why that they were having such a rough go of it last season. Heck, also Pete, 309th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and the teams that were able to excel, it's not like they were top 10 defenses or anything like that. You're never going to find that in this conference. North Alabama, they were about 152nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Lipscomb was 66th in the country, and they were, if you take a look at just the home and road splits in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis away from home, this was a Lipscomb team that actually did finish in the top 35 in all of college basketball, so they were able to do a pretty rock solid job there. Heck, you've got a team like in Eastern Kentucky that always finds themselves towards the top of the conference. They're a little bit hit or miss with regards to their defense, 274th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but their saving grace is that they're able to throw at you a lot of havoc. They're able to do a nice job of generating turnovers. You really don't find that from a lot of the other schools in this conference, and then you've got a little bit of a wild card in Jacksonville, and that Jacksonville actually really improved with regards to their three-point shooting last year, but they always seem to be a little bit of a, shall we say, hodgepodge with regards to what you're going to be able to get out of them defensively. Last year, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they were 136th in all of college basketball, and this is very much a conference that a lot of teams really do live and die by the three ball, and you did have some nice three-point shooting exposés last season for North Florida. They didn't necessarily shoot it the greatest from three, but they took a higher percentage of their shots from three-point range rather than any other team in all of college basketball. Now, they do lose their coach in the offseason, so we'll see if that maintains. But for North Florida, 114th in the country with regards to their three-point shooting percentage at 35%. North Alabama, 131st. They were shooting about 34.6% from three-point after a really rough start to the season for Lipscomb. Lipscomb was able to show their worth. They finished up 49th in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage, and they, as a collective, shot 36.4%. I mentioned Jacksonville. They were up to 35th, being able to shoot 36.8% from three-point range, and then you saw the fall-off with the teams that they really had a little bit of a rough go of it. Bellarmine, honestly, wasn't the world's worst team with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. They were actually shooting 35.6%, but again, when you're a bottom 5 team in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, that's not great to say the least. And then you had West Georgia, 349th, shooting 29.7% from distance. Austin Peay certainly had their ups and downs. They were shooting about 34% from three, 169th in the country. So massive emphasis on these teams being able to pop it from three-point range. Stetson, another one of those teams that they love to be able to bomb it from three-point range. They were about 189th in the country at 33.6%, and this did lead to some very, shall we say, fascinating results with regards to your against the spread trends in this conference. And if you're looking at the overall totals as well, you do have quite a few teams that they play at, shall we say, harebrained paces. You either get teams that play super duper slow or super duper fast. Central Arkansas, in terms of total possessions per game, they have been in the top 90 for well over a decade, like time and time again. This is always a team that's going to be just speeding themselves up in general. Central Arkansas honestly was a little bit slower last year in terms of total possessions per game than what they normally are for Central Arkansas. They finish up the year about 122nd in the country. That's the slowest that they've been in quite some time. And then you do have quite a few slow teams in this conference as well. When Stetson was really humming a few seasons ago, they were traditionally about a bottom 25, bottom 30 team with regards to total possessions per game. Just out of necessity last year, they did have to speed up a little bit to 128th. Austin Peay was about 214th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and you saw the teams at the top. They had some relatively solid balance, as North Alabama, in terms of total possessions per game, about 226th in all of college basketball. For Lipscomb, they were clocking in more than neighbored about 251st. They were a little bit slower. Jacksonville has been a team that has been very much a flip-flopper. At times they are sometimes the slowest team in all of college basketball, sometimes the fastest. Last year they were 174th in the country. Your team that really likes to speed it up typically is Eastern Kentucky, and even they were 154th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So you had a lot of teams that were neither here nor there in terms of really speeding it up, slowing it down. West Georgia trying to find their sea legs at the Division I level. They were right around about 169, so you've got a lot of equals with regards to their just total possessions per game. And if you take a look at the way that these teams were able to play to the over, especially in non-conference play, you had all but 3 teams be able to make you money to the over. Florida Gulf Coast, who, by the way, they are one of your slower teams in this conference. They were outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game. 7 overs, 8 unders. Lipscomb, 3 overs and 9 unders. And Austin Peay, 1 over and 10 unders. But then you had North Florida. Out of their 11 non-conference games, they played 10 of them to the over. Bellarmine, 9-3 to the over outside the conference. Jacksonville, Eastern Kentucky, Central Arkansas, all 7-4 to the over. Stetson, 8-4 to the over. North Alabama, 8-6 to the over. So you had a lot of teams that were getting very, very rambunctious. And then when it came to conference play, you did see a little bit of a tapering off with regards to these overs, but you only had 4 teams that had more unders than overs. Lipscomb, 10 overs, 11 unders. Stetson, 9 overs to 10 unders. And then Jacksonville and North Alabama, 8-12 to the under, with North Alabama having to push in there as well. And then you had Austin Peay, Central Arkansas, 14 overs to 6 unders. Eastern Kentucky, 13 overs to 6 unders. North Florida, 12 overs to 7 unders. And that's because you just have so many teams that love to shoot it from 3. You really don't have so many super duper slow teams in this conference anymore. And with regards to the Atlantic Sun, if you're looking at teams that rewarded you against the spread, not too many in this conference. You had 3 teams at above 52.4% against the spread last season. Central Arkansas was actually one of them. 17-13-1 against the spread. North Alabama was your supreme team, 22-13 against the spread. And Queens NC, 19-14 against the spread. But you had a lot of teams that were just dismal in general, and it was all the bad defensive teams. Stetson, Austin Peay, 14-17 against the spread. North Florida, 12-17-1 against the spread. West Georgia, 12-18 against the spread. Bellarmine, 11-19 against the spread. And if you take a look at what happened in conference play and conference play only, it was a case where you really were able to make some nice money on North Alabama. 14-7 against the spread. Queens NC, 12-8 against the spread. They were a relatively good team down low, with Malcolm Brown leading all of college basketball with regards to blocks per game. And then, again, the bad defensive teams were the ones that they lost you money. North Florida 6-12-1 against the spread in conference play. West Georgia 6-12 against the spread in Atlantic Sun play. Bellarmine 7-11 against the spread. Now, Lipscomb was actually 9-12 against the spread in conference games. That was mainly because they were just laying so many points that it just got a little bit out of whack, and I thought that it was very interesting with regards to this conference that you did see the favorites actually do quite solid. Now, you had a few favorites that they just were dead. Bellarmine was 1-5 against the spread as a favorite because they just had a sad and miserable year. Eastern Kentucky was 6-8 against the spread as a favorite. And North Florida 5-9-1 against the spread as a favorite. But how about North Alabama? 18-6 against the spread as a favorite. Queens NC 11-4 against the spread as a favorite. Jacksonville 10-8 against the spread as a favorite. Lipscomb a break-even 13-13, and Stetson 3-1 against the spread as a favorite. So lots of interesting results happened last season out there in the Atlantic Sun. Now we need to take a look at some of the transition that has happened in the offseason. We need to take a look at what we can expect out of these teams, and Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, is going to be able to help me break that down next. Right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast, the Atlantic Sun Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Great to be joined by this man as we've got Blake Lovell aboard. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16. I think he's joined me now for at least 5 years to preview the Atlantic Sun. It might be even longer. Just such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to taking a look at this great game of college basketball. Does a great job being able to decipher so much as well over on the Clutch Point Sports app/website as well. He does a little bit of everything, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell, and Blake. It's great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Thanks as always for having me, Greg. I was thinking about it, and I think since we did start doing this, I think there have been like 6 new teams that have joined the Atlantic Sun. I always think about that. I'm like, man, some of these teams we were talking about in other conference previews, and then I think back to the Atlantic Sun, and I'm like, there have been so many sort of changes, and it'd be funny to go back and listen to the first one we did because, again, there have been, I think, 6 or 7 new teams since we started doing this.
Oh, there certainly have been, and I remember in our early days, we were always talking about Liberty being the big bad wolf in the conference. That's really become Lipscomb. Lipscomb was the team that was able to make it to the NCAA tournament, but as we know, Lipscomb, they lose so much of that team from a season ago. Now they're going to be transitioning as they're bringing the coach from Trevecca Nazarene to take over. I always love it when they bring in these Division II coaches on over to the Division I ranks, as it's going to be Kevin Carroll who's going to be taking over. How do you take a look at this team, one where it's a lot of new pieces and a lot of guys going from the D2 ranks to the D1 level?
Yeah, it is interesting because, like you said, for those who don't kind of know, like Trevecca, a local school here in Nashville. And yeah, I mean, we've seen that over the years. I mean, it's a different situation, but think back to, like the situation you certainly had when Casey Alexander took over at Lipscomb. He was an assistant at Belmont for a long time. They stayed kind of local, bring a guy over who knows the area. And I think that's clearly something with Kevin Carroll. That's what they're going to try to do in the same situation. Someone who had been there and has familiarity in terms of just being able to understand, like, yeah, it is the NIL era and all that, but it's nice to kind of have that local touch as well. And he's someone that was formerly an assistant there under Lenny Acuff. And so I think it makes a lot of sense. You want to kind of keep that sort of same momentum going as a program. And I think just having him who has been in that system with Acuff before and now being in a situation where you kind of keep some of those same fundamental elements, to me, that was probably the biggest decision in the hire that they made. And so, yeah, I am kind of fascinating to see that sort of how it plays out. Again, I mean, Carroll was only at Trevecca for a couple of years, but I think just my guess is you're not going to see a lot of changes just from a schematic approach standpoint, just because he is someone who's been with Lenny Acuff before, and I would expect the same sort of style of play and such.
Yep, I would as well, and I do think that they were very smart in trying to find a coach that can very much emulate what they've had in terms of success over the last few seasons, and this is a team that had a lot of success. This was a program that I think might have been in their first year when we did our first preview podcast, North Alabama, and they have become a force out there in the Atlantic Sun. They won 24 games last season, and while they do lose so much of that top backcourt, bringing back Cornelius Williams is big. Him being back in the fold, I think they might be the best low post player in this conference, but I think the big question is, what are they going to be able to get in terms of guard play?
Yeah, I think so too. And, we were talking about Tony Pujols. I mean, back in the day, it's like, hey, this is not going to be something that happens right away. They're going to need to kind of let this play out, which we know in this era, that's not always easy to do. But, you did finally kind of see that pay off last year. They've had some successful seasons 2 of the past 3 years. and to win 24 games last year, 14-4, obviously in the conference. I mean, that was a huge step forward. And like you said, one of the big reasons for that, when you look back at sort of their style of play, is they were a really good offensive team. And, I was looking at the numbers earlier on them. I mean, they were one of the best in the country in terms of limiting turnovers. And so now when you look at a team and are saying, okay, how does this look from a guard standpoint? I think it is fair to ask, because obviously you look at sort of some of the exits. And I mean, I think we would probably agree that, the biggest one is to see, what a Jakari Lane, now is someone who's going to be kind of exiting to Texas A&M to join Bucky McMillan over there now. That's a big exit in terms of the value that he brought to that team. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they move forward now. And I would still expect, I think they figured some things out again, just kind of what's worked for them, especially last season. But it is going to be a few more questions than maybe we had last year at this time.
Yep, no question about it. It's Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, does an amazing job breaking down the sport of basketball, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this is a program that is the newest one to the Division I level in the conference. That'd be West Georgia. And questions abound after last year. It wasn't so great for the team. They lose the guys like Sheldon Williams-Dryden that were so good for them a season ago. Now, I will say they've got Malcolm Noel, their point guard, back. They bring in someone like a Josh Smith from NC Central, but I think that much like you were talking about with North Alabama, it's a work in progress for them. It was for a very long time. This is a big-time work in progress right now for West Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to put it, right? I mean, they came in, and we just know that's how it works. Like, it's very rare. Sure, there have been some of those situations we've seen before where, programs have kind of come in and just been able to have success right away once they make that jump up. And I think you could kind of see, trying to draw the parallels, like even a UC San Diego, right? I can remember when we were talking about them in the Big West several years ago. And like, they were such a team that were like, all right, if there is going to be a team, they're going to easily sort of acclimate. Like they didn't. Like, it took a little bit for them to really get rolling. And, obviously they've now over the past couple of years become kind of a standard of that. But I think that's just the way it works. Like, it's really hard. Going to more be the outliers that are able to just have success right away. And like you said, with West Georgia, I think a program that's trying to figure out how do you sort of stay afloat in this current era of college basketball when you have so many transfers and guys going in and out and all that. And yeah, like you mentioned, I think getting a Malcolm Noel back is significant, but it still seems like this is a team that's going to be kind of fighting from behind there.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that it's going to be a little bit of a rough season for them. And last year it was a rough season for Austin Peay, but I just take a look at what they've got coming back, and I think that there's reason for optimism. I think that Corey Gibson is a rock-solid coach. Tate McCubbin at 6'8" was shooting 39% from three, and what they were really missing last year, because they were rough on the glass, 336th in terms of rebound percentage. Rashad Marshall heading on over to Arkansas from Arkansas State. I think that that's one of the most significant pickups in the entire conference, and for Austin Peay, I don't think that they contend for like the number one spot or anything like that, but I think that they've got a chance of being able to crack this top five.
Yeah, I like the roster, like you said. I think when you just look at it on paper, it's easy to be kind of intrigued by what they can do. They do have some certainly older players, I think, in that rotation that are going to make a significant difference. But you did say something at the beginning, which I agree with. And I think that, with Corey Gibson, I mean, he is someone that I think you look at sort of the way that, and I kind of talked about it earlier in terms of like, it's important, I think, especially in this era, to have guys that do have some sort of, connection to the program and can kind of keep some of that same thing maybe that has worked in the past. Now, obviously, the Dave Luce era, that was years ago, but Austin Peay was having a lot of success then. I think for a former player like that who was playing there in the early 2000s, I mean, this is a guy who, if you're going to bring him in, he's going to do everything he can to make sure that his alma mater is successful, right? And they had that nice first season there. Took a little bit of a step back last year, but I do think the roster, as you said, looks to be improved and may not be the team that is favored to win the conference or anything like that. But I'd be surprised if they're not one of those teams that's up there having a chance to play spoiler maybe in that top 4 or 5 on a night in and night out basis.
Yep, I do agree with you there. And this team was the caboose of the conference last season for Bellarmine. And it was rough to see because we remember in their second year, they were that team that transitioned up to the Division I level. They would have went to the NCAA tournament if it weren't for the bogus rules that don't allow these teams to be able to go there. And they've sort of been hurt by that ever since then because they weren't able to build off that success. Brutal 5-26 season last year. Now it's a passing of the torch. You have Scott Davenport passing things on over to his his son Doug Davenport as the new coach. They bring back some guys like Jack Karzinski, and I think that things are going to be better for them. There's no way it can be worse, as they were second worst in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But I think the big question is, how big of a step forward do they take this season under the new coach in Doug Davenport?
Yeah, they were one of those teams when I was saying that earlier. I'm glad you brought it back up. That was coming to mind. I was like, they are kind of the outlier in that they came in, had a nice start. And like you said, especially look at that second season and what they're able to achieve. And then it's just, okay, can you sustain that? Well, they didn't. They've won 13 games combined the past 2 years. And like you said, I mean, clearly you can point at the defensive element and understand that is the significant weakness when it comes to just how they've been able to kind of have that drop off. Because, you think about it, I remember too, when we were having those conversations, we're like, hey, this is an offensive style transitioning up that looks like it's going to fit pretty well in this conference. And of course, they came out and they finished in the top 30-ish or something like that in all these sort of statistical categories their first year. Now, you fast forward and you're like, well, what happened? Well, we're going to see, like you said, if this is kind of a situation where Doug Davenport can come in and just try to maybe find some of those things that were working early and bring that back in the fold. Obviously, you got to play defense, and your defensive numbers have to be much better to be able to do that. But we also always say the same thing, Greg. It's like, it's okay to not play great defense, but you got to be able to score too. And sure, their numbers, scoring wise were fine last year, but they weren't to the level of being able to catch up to opponents who were just putting up 80 and 90 points at times, it seems. So I do think, like you said, it can't really get worse after finishing 5-26. I think they'll be better, but it's just, as we talk about some of these other programs too, it's hard to look at them and say, all right, I don't really know that they're going to jump them, or them, right? I mean, Austin Peay was a team that won only 6 more conference games, but it's like, if you're looking at those teams who are in the bottom half, you have to try to find ways to put them ahead of teams like that. And it's like, I just don't know how you do it right now.
Yep, I am right there with you. It's going to be a rough season for them, to say the least. I do think that they avoid the complete cellar, and I think that this is one of those teams that avoids the cellar as well, as Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. For Central Arkansas, things have been terrible for them. Like, ever since it came up to the Division I level 2 decades ago, no success to be found whatsoever. And I'm not saying that this is going to be a team that's going to be fighting for a top 5 spot in the conference or anything like that. I think that there's a little bit of brightness here for Central Arkansas. Bringing back Cameron Hunter, who was so good for them during that 2022-23 season, was at Wisconsin last year, couldn't get out there on the court. He's back. Javon Guy, who was averaging 7 points per game 2 seasons ago, missed all of last year. He's back. Ty Robinson, limited to 2 games last season, but showed some promise. He's back as well. All of a sudden for Central Arkansas, year number 2 of a new coaching regime. I'm not saying that they're going to make and go and light the world on fire or anything like that, but I think that there's actual upside here for Central Arkansas, something that hasn't been able to be said for a very long time for them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everything always ties back to Lenny Acuff somehow. And it's like with John Schulman, remember, like, he took over at Alabama Huntsville for Lenny Acuff, and you see the success, which is why he got, the opportunity to have this job. I mean, he won 75% of his games when he was at Alabama Huntsville. And like you said, year one, you're not expecting this guy to just come in and completely change everything. I think that's unrealistic based on, as you mentioned, you just look at the numbers. I mean, this was a team that now has won, 9 games in 3 straight seasons. And you just keep going back. Like, just not had the success to speak of. But now it's like, all right, even just matching 9 wins like from the season before, I think is at least showing, okay, we didn't just completely come in and take just a huge step back. We're not where we need to be, but we didn't just completely, put ourselves in a situation where we're winning 3 or 4 games or something. And I do think, again, it kind of ties back to, do you have sort of a system, especially now, that you can sort of work to be able to have success? And again, you sort of go back to what he did at Alabama Huntsville and being able to maybe try to take some of those things and use it to be successful here. And it is one of those sometimes. And I feel like we've talked about this with other programs and other conferences where it's like, at some point, you're not able to find ways to win, right? And your program just, however many coaches they've been through. I mean, I don't know, what's the number, 5 or 6, something like that, since maybe the past decade or so. I mean, that's probably a little over a decade. What is going to be the thing that changes it? And I think especially in this era, Greg, where we are talking about, NIL and paying players and all this other stuff. I mean, at some point, it's just like, hey, do you just completely blame the coaches and say this is just something where they just cannot find a way to get it done? Or is it just something where, man, that they need to find ways to maybe, get more resources and be able to put more into it? And, again, there's no blame on that necessarily. It's just maybe the state of the way things are. But I do expect, like you said, them to take a little bit of a step forward again. I think John Schulman's a pretty good coach. We'll see, too. Again, he was at Chattanooga way back when. So guy that has some experience, it's just this is a tough place to win no matter who you are.
Oh, I am right there with you. It is a very tough place to be able to win, but I do think that he's doing a solid job. And I think that for Jacksonville, they've been able to turn that corner a little bit, but I do have a few question marks with them because they have to replace all their top 6 scorers from a season ago. And I don't care who you are. That is a big, giant issue right there. Now, they do bring in a few guys like a Jalen Jones, who you can tell he just wasn't necessarily a good fit when he was over at Oakland last season 2 years ago. When he was over at Tennessee State, was able to do a pretty rock solid job for them. They are going to be bringing back someone like an Enrico Barrio, who shot 52% from three-point range in a pretty small sample size last season. How do you take a look at this Jacksonville team? One that I think that they've got a lot of good elements, but they're always built around low post play, and they lose so much of that low post play from a season ago.
Yeah, it is something that's going to be interesting. Like you said, I mean, you just sort of can look at some of the things that they've had some success with. And one of the numbers, that obviously seems to always stand out with them under Jordan Mincy has just been their ability on the glass. They've been a really good offensive rebounding team for the most part. I know that one year they were not, but I mean, that's kind of been something that's always kind of stuck, it feels like. Certainly you look at kind of the trends with their tempo and such as well. They've gotten to where they've played faster, as the years have progressed seemingly. And so I think it is one too, where it's going to be fascinating to see just from a stylistic standpoint. And we do always go back to that, where it's like, sometimes you do have these guys who are just able to work their style, no matter the year, the roster transfers and all that. But sometimes it's like, hey, you just kind of got to be a chameleon, right? Where sometimes you just got to play this way, you got to play that way, and just do what you can with the strengths of your roster. And I think that's clearly what they're trying to do. But like you said, I think you have guys that exit. That makes it a little tougher because now you're bringing in some new players, and can they be guys who kind of fit into that mold of what you're trying to do to be successful as a program? And the chemistry, that's what we always talk about too. I think with teams like this, it's just how does the chemistry fit with some of these guys? You just never know until you get everybody out on the court. But Jalen Jones is an interesting one. Like you said, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how he fits into this role with this particular team. But hard team for me to kind of place right now in terms of maybe where I think they wind up.
Yep, I think that they're an interesting team. I personally have them right towards the middle of the conference myself, so I do think that it's going to be a little bit of a tricky team to be able to gauge because they do lose so much of that low post play from a season ago, but at the same time, as we know, with this program under Mincy, they've been able to achieve some nice things. As Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, he's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and this, I think, is going to be a very fascinating team, as well as I take a look at North Florida and the fact that they lose their coach so late in the process. That is just absolutely brutal. Now, they did hire from within. The interim coaching regime is pretty much the guys that were already there. As Driscoll, he decided that he was going to be taking an assistant coaching job somewhere else, and we've seen quite a bit more of that here in the past few seasons. Now, as of right now, North Florida didn't lose a lot of those players that they could enter in the transfer portal within 30 days, and as we were doing this podcast, it's still within the 30 days. So you could lose someone like a Devin Hines who comes in from Lafayette. But how do you take a look at a North Florida team that, this as well as I do? They take a higher percentage of their shots from three-point range than any other team in all of college basketball. Now you transition to an interim coaching regime that they have familiarity with it, but they might put their own spin on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, Matthew Driscoll, as you said, had been there for 15 years. I mean, his first season was 2009, 2010. At a certain point, again, you're just kind of looking up and just trying to figure out, okay, how do we break through as a program? And, they had their ups, they had their downs, and it was just kind of one of those where am I shocked that eventually he's like, hey, as you mentioned, Greg, kind of the trend of, all right, he leaves, now he goes to Kansas State, reunite with Jerome Tang. Maybe that's just a better situation, especially in this era where you're fighting the battle of keeping your players. Like, you're in a situation where your best players are going to be probably headed elsewhere, right? I mean, look no further than Chaz Lanier, who was someone who was there, seemingly one of the better sort of, maybe underrated players in the country. And then he winds up at Tennessee and everybody and then he winds up at Tennessee and everybody realizes, okay, well, this is great. Works out great for Tennessee, right? But what does it do for North Florida? I think that's just the nature of where we are. And I think promoting from within, like you said, because it was late in the process, by adding Bobby Kennedy to the mix, I mean, he's someone who does have a lot of experience. I think been the associate head coach since 2012, I think it was.
Yep.
So I think from that perspective, what else could you do, right? I mean, that was probably the best option of the ones you had available when your coach leaves. I mean, your longtime coach leaves at that stage of the game. But, now we kind of see, can they carry over some of that? And like you mentioned, it's not a situation where everybody just transfers out immediately, which is, again, why they probably made that move. But still, as I do look at the roster, kind of the projected one as I see it right now, it's just unknowns. You don't know exactly how this is going to go when you have a coaching change like that, and it was a team, as you said, I mean, last year you could look up and say, well, they won 8 conference games. That kind of put them right there in the middle. I would probably expect more of the similar type scenario this year. Maybe that's kind of the range you look at for them. But it is, as we looked at some of those other teams, maybe hard to see that they're just going to all of a sudden catapult themselves back into the ASUN title picture.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be relatively rough. And when you lose a coach that late in the process, I don't care who you are, that is a tough road to hoe. And for this team, they made the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago. They got blown out by UConn, and then they got blown out all throughout the 2024-25 season. I'm talking about Stetson. Now, they do bring back Jamie Phillips Jr., who he was averaging 11 points, shot relatively well from three-point range, and they've got a guy at 6'11", Trayton Thomas, who he's not the greatest three-point shooter, but Thompson, he's able to pop it a little bit from three-point range, and I love Donnie Jones as a coach. I just look at this roster, though, and I don't see anywhere for them to go other than in the bottom few of this conference, just because I look at this roster and I just don't see a lot of talent outside of Jamie Phillips Jr.
Their defensive numbers have just not been good. Now, they've still been able to win games. That's the thing. And I had said that earlier. That if you look at kind of the past couple of years where, what was it? They got to the tournament, as you said, got sort of steamrolled by UConn. And even the year before where they had won 12 conference games. You know, the difference was their defensive numbers had not really come up to a respectable level. But they were an elite type offensive team at times. Like they weren't, top 5 or anything like that, but they finished top 50 in offensive efficiency in 2023. The next year they finished around the top 100, shot the ball really well in those 2 years, from 3. So I think that's it. If you're going to have those kind of numbers, which if you look at the numbers overall, I mean, they finished, as I look at KenPom, 270th or lower in defensive efficiency every single year under Donnie Jones. I'm with you. I think he's a good coach. It's just they've not been able to figure that out. And that's where if you take a big step back offensively, like they did last year, that's going to get you to an 8-24 type season. So I'm more curious, as you said, you look at the roster and feel like there are some things that you look at here and say, all right, they've got a lot of sort of guys that are upperclassmen. How do they kind of fit into the mix? And again, I think I do look at them as one of those teams that I actually could see potentially taking a step forward. They won 6 games in the conference last year. They only won 2 outside the conference, but it's just, is that going to be enough to put them ahead of some of these other teams? I just don't know. I think they're probably more in that picture of I'd be a little more surprised if they're able to take that big step up. But to me, it all starts with, hey, if they can keep having some of these defensive numbers, they just got to be much better offensively. And that was a thing where taking a step back the way they did last year, that was just not a recipe for success.
No, it certainly was not. And it was a rough season for them, to say the least, but it was a good season for this team. Queens NC, their first ever 20-win season at the Division I level. And they were another one of the teams that they were rock solid at the Division II level, won the standards of Division II college basketball. Took them a little bit of time, but I think that this is a team that can really rise up in the standings. I think that they've got a chance to be able to finish in the top 3 in the conference. They bring back their point guard in Bryce Cash. Yov Berman is one of the better three-point shooters in this conference. They maintain quite a few guys. They bring in Carson Schwieger, who I think has some upside coming in from Valparaiso. Gus Larson didn't see a lot of time at Cal, but bringing in a big man from Cal, that's always a good sign. And for Queens, it feels like they were able to figure out what we've been talking about a lot of these teams. A lot of these teams in the conference, they shoot it well from 3. They've got good offense, but they've got no defense whatsoever. With having what they had down low last season in terms of one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball, and now bringing in more size to be able to replenish that was lost from 8 seasons ago, I think that Queens NC has a chance to bust through and really have a nice season.
The size is what stands out to me, as you said. I mean, this is a team that probably, based on their roster right now, is going to start in every position someone that's 6'4" or 6'5" or taller. And when you look at their front court, I think, as I see it right now, I mean, you're talking 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". You've got some wing guys, 6'6", 6'7". They're guards. I mean, they have big guards. And I think that's something, too, that can really play a role. And like you said, I think sort of having that identifiable offensive style a bit helped them here. We know the tempo. We were talking about it a couple of years ago where they had played at a top 10 tempo in the country. Clearly, that's how they're going to try to play. And I think from that perspective, looking at kind of having the size, being able to sort of, be in transition, have bigger guys who can finish at the basket and those kind of things, I do think they're one of those teams that feels like they do have the momentum of moving forward, moving up in the standings. After a 21 season, they played in the CBI, got to the quarterfinals there. I'm kind of more optimistic about Queens just because I do look at kind of the path that they've had over the past several seasons and feel like, okay, that felt like a nice step in terms of being able to kind of flip it from just being in the middle of the pack, winning 7 games, I think it was the previous 2 seasons in ASUN play. Now you take that big jump to 11. And like we mentioned, Greg, think about some of these other teams we talked about here recently. Not exactly anything for some of these, maybe group of 4 or 5 teams that stands out to say, well, they're going to jump a team like Queens. I just don't see that happen right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that this is a very golden opportunity for them. I do think that they're going to be able to take full advantage of it. I think that there's a lot of upside here with Queens NC. As joining me on the show, we do have Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then when I take a look at this bunch, I think that it's going to be really interesting because they've been one of the stalwarts of this conference. Eastern Kentucky, 12-plus wins each of the last 3 years. They have to replace so much of what made them so good on the post last season. They do have to replace their top 3 scorers, including George Kimmel, who I really like, but I love the fact that they bring in Juan Cranford, who's rock solid out there in the NEC. Turner Buttery, great name. He's able to give you some scoring as well. And I just believe in A.W. Hamilton. I just believe in the system. A.W. Hamilton, you can give him like some poop-tastic roster, and somehow, somebody, he's going to drag that team to the top half of the conference. I think that he does so once again this year.
Well, you give the guy the benefit of the doubt at this point. I mean, all but 2 seasons, I think, they've won at least 12 conference games.
Incredible.
And so that was 2018-19 and 21-22 were the 2 years that they did not. And so I'm like, how could you not just bank on the idea that they're going to find a way to finish in the top 4 somehow, some way? And again, when we compare them to some of these other teams we have more questions about and maybe have had coaching turnover a bit, how could you not look at this team and say, I have to put them somewhere, kind of in that top tier? What are they doing? They're slowing down, Greg. Why are they slowing down their style of play here? 161 in adjusted tempo last year after finishing I think in the top 10 over 3 straight years to start his tenure. They top 50 and top 100 pretty much every other year. Maybe get back to playing at that top 5 type tempo. That'd be more my style. But no, he's a really good coach. And like you said, they have a style. They work it really well. I think with the roster, upgrades in some of these spots. And like you said, I think overall that they are a team. You'd be more surprised than not if they're not competing for an ASUN title.
Yep, I'm right there with you. In A.W. Hamilton, I trust. Guy time and time again gets the job done. And we've got one last team to talk about. For my money, this should be the favorite coming in Florida Gulf Coast. This feels like a put up or shut up year for Pat Chambers. It feels like there's a little bit of unrest out there in, I believe that it's Fort Myers, Florida. And with that said, Florida Gulf Coast, rock solid offensive team. They were able to make that nice run in the CBI. They've got some guys that are very interesting coming in, including apparently of relation to our nation's first president, George Washington III. Obviously no relation coming in as well. But how can you not bank on old George, because he was able to get it done in the Battle of Trenton? But that said, how do you take a look at this Florida Gulf Coast team? One where they certainly will not have to go to Trenton to win games this year.
Yeah, if you cannot trust the guy who got it done in the Battle of Trenton, who can you trust? That's the way I look at it. That would be great, Greg, if we use that. If someone uses that in a broadcast this year, this is why Florida Gulf Coast should be the favorite. I'm all in on it because I do, like you said, I do look at this team and feel like, jokes aside, that there's a roster there that feels like it should be in a position to win the conference. Obviously, we've talked about some of the teams that will have a chance to compete there, but you mentioned kind of looking at Pat Chambers and what he's been able to do there in 3 years so far. When they made that hire, that's not just a hire you're making to say, hey, we're going to get by winning 7 or 8 games in conference play. You got to do more so of what you did last year, and that's get to a much higher number. Now, that was still not enough, right? It's still Dunk City. It's still, a fan base, I think, that thinks about the highs, which there have been plenty of highs, in the past. And it's how do we get back to that point, which is always a challenge. But I think now the goal is to make the NCAA tournament. And I feel like that is kind of your expectation as you sit here with the next, opportunity to do so. Because if not, it's like, well, why do we make this hire? Because we made the hire to get to the tournament. That's really what it comes down to. And so I'm with you. I think this is one where they need to probably put themselves in a position to be able to do just that. And obviously they were right there last year with an opportunity to do the same, but you've got to kind of be able to come through. I mean, losing in the conference tournament early last year, having a strong finish to finish as high as they did, there was a lot of momentum. And now can they carry some of that momentum over and be able to turn it into a conference championship? I think that's the expectation from fans there in Dunk City.
Yep, I think so as well. It's going to be interesting to see if they can live up to expectations. And Blake, while you were not there for the Battle of Trenton, had you been there, I know that you would have gotten the job done because you get the job done with all of your coverage. You're doing a great job over at Southeastern 16. You truly are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to college basketball. Love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you. I know people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find the SEC stuff, Southeastern 16. Very little Revolutionary War references, so you may not find as many of those there, but we'll try to come up with a battle for somebody in the SEC when we talk about stuff over there. But yeah, all my other college basketball related stuff, you can follow me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
We had Turner Buttery, we had the Battle of Trenton. This had a little bit of everything, and Blake is just so good at being able to break down this great game of college basketball. A big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time the podcast is. I take a look at my projector finish for the Atlantic Sun. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Was an absolute pleasure to be able to get Blake Lovell aboard. He's doing such amazing work over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. Every single time he joins me, he lends such amazing insights. He did so once again today. So a big thanks to our good friend Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the Atlantic Sun. And before I go any further, any Twitter/X questions that you had for the podcast today, I'm going to be answering those on the podcast tomorrow. And any news and notes that I miss in college basketball from the past 24 hours, they're going to be taken care of on the podcast tomorrow. So those will be the last 48 hours of college basketball news and notes. So do not fear, those are all going to be taken care of, but always want to give as much shine as humanly possible that I can to these conference previews and take a look at these teams as much depth as humanly possible. So we made sure to be able to give the proper love here, and how about if we do give proper love to dead last in terms of our projector and finish, that'd be Stetson. And I like Donnie Jones at Stetson. Donnie Jones was actually a solid coach way back in the day over at Central Florida, but this is just a very bare bones team, and they have never really played a lot of defense, and when you don't have guys that are able to bomb it from three-point range, you really have nothing with this team, as they're going to be looking at something like Colin Cool, who averaged 2.5 points and 3 rebounds per game over at Georgia Southern last year to help elevate this team. You got 6'9" Matar Diop to be able to give you a little bit of something down low, but where's the three-point shooting that you had a few seasons ago? Jamie Phillips Jr. last year, 11 points, 2 assists, shot 37% from 3. Good start. Trayton Thomas, he had 6'11", averaged about 4.3.5 rebounds per game, and he's capable of popping it from 3 points. But Daniel McGregor, he averaged 3 points per game as a freshman, and they're really looking for him to elevate, and I just don't think that he's going to be able to do so. Finley Sheridan, he was averaging about 3.5 points per contest, shot 34.5% from 3, but his team still doesn't have a lot of size down low. 332nd in the country in terms of percentage of the missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound, 341st in terms of overall rebound percentage, with not bringing in a lot of size to be able to cut through there. Man, I do think that it's going to be relatively rough for them, and I think that they are in for a very long year. So I do have them dead last with regards to my projector finish. At number 11, I'm going to be going with North Florida, the Mighty Osprey. Now, Matthew Driscoll is now out as their coach. He was the coach for a very, very long time, and he decided that he was going to be taking a assistant coaching job elsewhere. So that means that you've got a very strange and weird transition for this team, and they decided to stay in-house because they really didn't have any other options, and they went with Bobby Keenan, who's pretty much going to be serving as the interim head coach for this team, and he has been on the bench for them for over a decade. He's been with them, and he knows the Matthew Driscoll system. So I do think that North Florida, a team that was number 1 in all of college basketball in terms of percentage of their shots that came from three-point range, they're going to be sticking with it. Now, after you did have this coaching transition, not a lot of guys left. As far as I've seen, and we are still within the 30-day cycle from when you did have the coaching move happen, you still have a lot of these guys like Devin Hines, who's going to be entering from Lafayette. He was averaging 10 points per contest last season, but was limited to 8 games due to injury. Last full season, shot about 34% from 3 and about 10 points per contest. Cameron Oriole is really the lone guy from last season that gave you any sort of contributions. 7.5 points, shot 35% from 3 points. They lost each of their top 4 scorers from a season ago. Kent Jackson is going to be looking to elevate after getting about 2.5 points per contest over at Jacksonville last season. Very bare bones team. You now have an interim coaching regime. I just think that with that style in general for North Florida, we did see them take down South Carolina and Georgia Tech last season. I think that they're going to fall rerun backwards into a few wins, but I do think that it's going to be a relatively rough year for them. So I do have North Florida at number 11 in terms of my predictor finish. Number 10, going to be going with Bellarmine. The passing of the torch happens. Coach Scott Davenport, who had coached them all the way back in their Division II days, he passes things on over to his son, Doug Davenport. Davenport, and they do have a little bit of talent that comes back. Jack Karzinski was a little bit banged up last season, but when he was out there, 6'7" wing that averaged 15.5 points on 38% three-point shooting. Tyler Doyle, he was a starter last season that averaged about 6.5 points, 2 assists per game. Keon Gooden, he's able to give you about 7 points per contest. So, I mean, you've got some pieces here, and Gooden shot over 48% from three-point range. Miles Watkins, need him to take a bit of a step forward. If I'm not mistaken, comes over from North Dakota State, was averaging 6 points per contest last season, but I mean, man, this is a bunch that last year they were 358th in terms of percentage of the missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound, 363rd in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I just don't think that Doug Davenport is going to be instilling a lot of defense for this Bellarmine team, and I think that they're going to struggle once again. So, at number 10 in my projector finish, I'm going with Bellarmine. Number 9, a little bit of a come up here for Central Arkansas. Central Arkansas has been at the cellar for such a long time. You want to talk about a skid mark on the underpants of college basketball. Man, these guys have been absolutely terrible. But here's a kicker for them. They've got Cameron Hunter back. Cameron Hunter spent last year over at Wisconsin. He averaged less than 1 point per game. 2 years ago, he was completely banged up. So you have to go back to the 2022-23 season as he's a boomerang transfer. He was over at Central Arkansas during that 2022-23 season. 17 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, steal and a half per contest. Him and him alone, I think, is going to save this team from being completely sorry. And then you got Javon Guy King. He's going to be back after he missed all of last season with 7 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, a little bit of versatility there. Ty Robinson was limited to 2 games last season, but he looked promising in the minutes that he was able to show. Cole McCormick is a guy that's able to give you about 8 points, a steal per contest. You actually have some pieces here with Central Arkansas. Central Arkansas, they're very early on in a little bit of a coaching change themselves, as last season they passed things on to John Schulman, so they're going to be looking at him to be able to turn things around, and they did play a little bit more slowly last season, and they didn't allow a lot of free throw attempts to their opponents, so yay verily there. But that said, I do think that while things are going to be rough for Central Arkansas, they were in the bottom 10 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. I do think that they're getting a little bit better on the glass, and I do think that they avoid the cellar here. So at number 9 in my projector finish, went with Central Arkansas. At number 8 in terms of my projector finish, I'm going to be going with West Georgia. With West Georgia, it's been a relatively rough transition, and I was talking about Blake Lovell. I wasn't feeling too bullish about this team, and I was going to put them at dead last until what we found out on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we found out that Sheldon Williams-Dryden, who was originally committed to UW Green Bay, he's going to be coming back. And this is massive. This is a big reason why they go from number 12 to number 8. He was averaging for the team 17.5 points, 7.5 boards, a little bit over a steal per contest, shot about 31.6% from 3, which doesn't sound great, but team was shooting as a collective 30.2% from 3. They were in the bottom 20 in all of college basketball with that regard. He's a 6'6", a little bit of a do-it-all player, and he's going to be one of the best players in this conference. And you also do bring back the main point guard in Malcolm Noel, who was able to give the team right around about 3.5 assists per contest, 6.3 points per contest. Now, outside of these two guys, you really are looking at relatively bare bones with regards to this team, so I don't think that this is going to be a West Georgia team that all of a sudden is going to be like Bellarmine, where a few seasons ago they went from being in the Division II ranks in year number 2, being able to win the conference tournament, and they would have been able to go to the NCAA tournament and not been for those stupid rules. But you also bring in Josh Smith from NC Central. He was able to shoot about 41.5% from 3, 6.5 points per contest to help out with that 3-point shooting. Matasia Zuzic, hopefully I said that correctly, from UT Martin. He's a guy with about 6'7" size, shot 36.5% from 3, 7.5 points per contest. You're also going to be bringing in a little bit of size in Jafar Daniel. Didn't see a ton of playing time over at S&P, about 2.2 rebounds per game, but for a team that was 311th in the nation last year in terms of rebound percentage, this is big. Again, this is an insert because West Georgia was going to be dead last in terms of my projector finish. Williams-Dryden really helps out this program. So as a result, we've got West Georgia at number 8 in terms of my projector finish. Now you get a little bit of a hodgepodge. Number 7 in terms of my projector finish, I'm going to be going Jacksonville. Jacksonville is losing quite a bit from last season. Robert McCray, the 4th, was really that go-to scorer for them, and Jacksonville is typically a team that they like to be able to build things on the glass, but when you lose all of your top 6 scorers from last season, that's going to be tough. You've got Chris Arias, who is looking to build off of a freshman season where averaged 6 points per contest, shot 41% from 3-point range in a 13-game sample size last season. Enrico Borillo was able to give you about 4 points per contest. Did shoot north of 50% from 3-point range, but again, a small sample size, and they're hoping that Oakland transfer Jalen Jones can find that form that he had 2 seasons ago when he was over at Tennessee State, where he was averaging 9 points, 4 boards, 2.5 assists. He was just lost in the sauce over at Oakland. 5 points, 3 assists, 3-point shooting, just went straight down the toilet bowl. They bring bring in Chris Lockett. He was averaging about 3 points per contest over at Boise State. He should be able to give them a little bit of pop down low. He was actually the top-rated freshman in the state of Louisiana by 247 Sports in the 2023 cycle. But again, with Jacksonville, it does feel like they've lost a lot of that identity of being able to be rough and tumble down low, have some question marks in the backcourt. So I do have them at number 7 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 6, I'm going to be going with Lipscomb. Lipscomb is in a very tough transitionary period where they're bringing in a new coach in Kevin Carroll. Kevin Carroll, he was over at Division II Trevecca Nazarene, and his teams were averaging about 82.7 points per contest, but they just don't bring back a lot from last season. Charlie Williams is their top scorer returning from last year. 5.5 points, part-time starter, shot 33% from three-point range. Grant Asman was able to give you about 3.5 points per contest. Kellen Boylan was able to give the team about 2.5 points per contest as well, but you just take a look around at this team and you're wondering, where is the offense going to be coming from? They do bring in some guys from the junior college level and the non-Division I level that they're hoping are going to be able to pan out. Some like a Miles White is a little bit of an upside guy. I know that with Josh Scott, he's got some, I guess you call it potential at 6'6". He's a freshman that I think that he could be able to pop a little bit for this team, but that's that. There's a lot of unknown with regards to this team, and with losing darn near everything from last season, I think that's going to be a tough transition. So I do have Lipscomb at number 6 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 5, I've got the Governators. We've got Austin Peay. I do think that having Tate McCubbin along with Anton Brookshire is going to be panning out very well for the team. For Austin Peay last year outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but McCubbin at 6'8", 10.5 points, 4.5 boards, shot 39% from 3 points. Brookshire was a 34% 3-point shooter. He gave the team 8.5 points per contest, and now you've got that rough and tumble down low. Rashad Marshall, he was over at Arkansas State last season, north of 5 rebounds per game. He should help out a team that was 336th in the country in terms of rebound percentage. Quan Lax, he's coming back after he had 5.5 points and a steal per contest. Takeo Carpenter is a guy that was a reserve last season that was able to log for them about 5.5 points per contest. So I do take a look at what these guys are able to give, and I do think that for Austin Peay, you do have quite a bit of upside. I think that just Corey Gibson in general is a very good coach. I think that he's going to be able to utilize what he's got to the most. So I do think that Austin Peay is going to be able to rise up in the standings. I do have them at number 5 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 4, I'm going to be going with North Alabama. For North Alabama, a little bit of a rough way to have their season end. They won 24 games, but they were unable to get to the NCAA tournament. They have to replace their entire backcourt from a season ago, but Cornelius Williams is back in. He might be the best low post player in this entire conference. 9.7 points, 9.1 rebounds per game. You've also got Dante Backus back after he shot 46.3% from 3-point range as reserve last season. You're able to get out of him about 8.5 points, 4 rebounds per contest. Kidder Brody, he comes in from Bishop State Community College at the junior college level, 13.5 points, 4 boards, 38% 3-point shooter, and Keenan Jefferson was able to give you 5.5 points per game as well. This team was really good in terms of doing the little things as well, and that's something that I think is going to be saying with this pool system. They were number 2 in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. They weren't necessarily built around amazing 3-point shooting, though they were so very good with regards to their 3-point shooting. They weren't necessarily built around just absolutely dominating on the glass, but again, they were still pretty good with that regard. They were built around doing the little things well, and I do think that they're going to continue to be able to do so. So North Alabama, I've got at number 4 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 3, I've just learned and knocked out this team. We are going to be going with Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky has had 3 straight seasons of winning at least 12 games within the conference. Now, they do have to replace each of their top 3 scorers, but you bring in Juan Cranford from St. Francis, Pennsylvania. He was able to shoot about 39.5% from 3, 10 points, 4 rebounds per game. That is really going to be able to help out this team in the backcourt. Turner Buttery is back. He had 8.5 points. He was buttery smooth, shooting 40% from 3-point range. They bring in Jackson Holt, guy that's able to give you 7 points on 37% 3-point shooting. Evans Paul, he should be able to give you a little bit more down low after he averaged about 3 rebounds per contest. Jalen Cooper, he in his 2 seasons over at Cal State Fullerton was able to shoot about 40% from 3 at 6'6". For Eastern Kentucky, I do think that they have brought in some guys that are going to be able to continue to help them be able to generate turnovers. I think that Cranford is a very underrated get for the team. The team is going to be very much built around their backcourt. Now, they just don't have as much down low than they had a few seasons ago. The last few seasons, they've actually had some very good low post play. I think that that's going to be taking a little bit of a departure, but that said, I look at this backcourt, and I do think that they're going to be able to keep this team very competitive and towards the top of the conference. So I do have at number 3 in my projector finish, Eastern Kentucky. At number 2, Queens NC. They reach 20 wins in Division I for the first time in program history. They were a rock-solid Division II program prior to making their transition, and they've got Cash. Bryce Cash. He last season is the main guy that is back from their 10-man rotation. They lose 6 of those guys, but Cash, he was able to give you about 4 assists, 4 boards, 5 points per game. Not too much of a scorer, but he was able to look to someone like a Yov Berman. Berman is back after he was able to give the team about 8 points, shot 40.5% from 3-point range. Jordan Watford, he's a guy that is a 6'5", little bit of a combo player, a former top 200 recruit in the class of 2025 that should help out this team. Nasir Mann, he is back after he was averaging about 6.5 points, a little bit over 3 rebounds per game, began his career over at McNeese State. You've got Mababin Jabril, hopefully I said that correctly, shot in the mid-30s from 3. He's able to give you some boards at 6'8", and then Carson Schwieger, he was a 35.5% three-point shooter over at Valparaiso at 6'8". Really good size. You've also been able to get a little bit of upside with regards to Gus Larson coming in as well. He had 6'10", comes in from California. I really like the way that this Queens NC team has been able to fortify itself. I've got them at number 2 in terms of my projector or finish, but number 1 is going to be going Florida Gulf Coast. For Florida Gulf Coast, it's a put up or shut up year for Pat Chambers, and I think that he's going to put up. This team was 43rd in the country in terms of points per possession away from home. They bring back Romero Barno, who was able to do a nice job of being able to give you about 8 points, 3.5 assists, steal and half per contest. Nice stat sheet suffer. George Washington III, not related to our nation's first president, but guy that was a former top 150 recruit of Michigan, spent the last few years on Michigan and Richmond's bench. I think that he's going to be able to give them some pop in the backcourt. You've got J.R. Kaczynski, who comes on over from Penn State, 7.5 points, 4.5 boards. He was a part-time starter during the 2023-24 campaign over at Notre Dame. And Michael Dwaks, he was really rock solid a few seasons ago when he was over at Northern Iowa. He had last year about 7.5 points, 4 boards. He's a little bit of a mixer and shaker, able to do a little bit of this and that. Tristan Gouliot as well. He was able to have 12 points, 9 rebounds, and 2 blocks in the team's final of the CBI against Cleveland State. He looks to be a nice upside guy down low. I think the Florida Gulf Coast has all the goods to be able to win this conference, and I think that they go out and do so. So I've got Florida Gulf Coast at number 1 in terms of my projector or finish, and that'll wrap things up for the Atlantic Sun Conference Preview edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like sharing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, think of an idea, what have you, for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game that we all know about with college basketball. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.